But wait, there's more.
What?
I know. So remember when we started this, we built those interlocking buttons for the navigations of our UCI, where one is on and the other ones are off. We did the same thing with the lighting presets, right? Where you have to turn one off and everything else deactivates. And at the time, when we first built them, we did them really, really manually, right? We said when this button presses, these things turn off and then this thing turns on. And we did that with individual event handlers for all of our buttons. And then we said, hey, what if we made a function out of it? Because that way was inefficient. And we made a new function. And we made that function. But even within that function, you had to have an if-else that was comparing, oh, if button 1 was on and button 2 was on, and if button 2 was on, and then...
I know this is going to come across like a broken record, but it's easier in real Lua.
Yes, I know, Jeff. You're right. But in this case, you can do it with blocks too. We maybe kind of misled you a little bit. You can make an interlocking function that is infinitely scalable with block controller. It's possible. But we didn't show you how to do it back then, because if we'd shown you then, it would have had all these blocks you had no idea what to do with. It would have been more confusing than it was helpful. Now that you've got all of your block controller knowledge gathered beneath you, I think you can follow along with this. I think you've got it. I think you're ready. Patrick, are you on board with this?
Yeah, I kicked Jeff out. Don't worry. He's gone.
Good.
He's a liar. He's the one that lied to you.
He's waiting for you in the next class. Here, we're going to do it with blocks. Okay, so along the way, here's what we're going to use. We're going to use a couple new tools. I'm going to show you the asterisk block. That's something very strange. There's a block that has an asterisk on it. What on earth is that? I'm going to use a little bit of a loop, the for loop. And the for loop has an item in it that is a local variable. We're going to use this control that we're calling the set determinable control, which is basically a set control block that doesn't know inherently which control it's going to change. And we already collapsed blocks, so you've seen that last time. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Go back to your design. And we're going to add a new block controller. I'm not going to even put this in our design. I'm going to put this free floating off to the edge of the design, because we're going to build this not in association to anything else whatsoever. I want you to open this up, and we're going to add some controls. So we're going to add toggle buttons, because these are our interlocking buttons. And let's not add 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Let's add 100.
What?
We're adding 100. Look at this big, all giant, long bank of controls. If we were going to build our interlocking button functionality for 100 in the ways that we used to do it, you know that would drive us all crazy, right? You'd have so many if-else, 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 if-else for 100 times. We're not going to do that. But we are going to make this work, and it's going to be beautiful. So go ahead and jump into your block controller. When we went down this route previously, you saw that we had like this limitation of the block controller. We were like, what if we could just grab this thing and shove it in there, right? Here's what we did. We said, hey, on the control bank change, actually, let's go back and name these properly just so we're not confused. Let's call this our interlocking buttons. So on the control interlocking buttons of any, we'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, if any of them change, the first thing we did was we turned them all off, and you can do that. You can say set controls Boolean for all of them. We'll set them all to false. But what we couldn't do is we couldn't set the one that we wanted to true. We know that when we have this type of an event handler, that we get a local variable called the control index. But you can't just shoehorn that control index right here where you want it. Boy, we really want to be able to just shove it right there. That would do the work that we need. We can't do that, but we can get around this in another way. So I want you to go to your controls and look at your interlocking buttons and scroll to the very bottom. There is a block called Controls Interlocking Buttons Asterisk. What on earth is that? This does not help you out much in any way. I'm going to grab that asterisk block and pull it in here. This block is an array. It is the array of our controls. That asterisk means that it could be many, many different things. Now, there's a couple of tools you may need in order to make this work to your advantage. One of them, now, I'll say again, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and I'll show you a couple different ways. One of them might be to use the for loop. So if we go to our flow control and grab the for loop. It says, for each item in array, well, you know you've got an array right here. So for every single item in this array, and in fact, you can rename this, for every single button in this array, you can do a thing. And I'll give you a hint, you can actually pull that variable out of the loop and use it within the context of that event handler, okay? That is something that is at your disposal. The other thing that is at your disposal that you might find useful is to go to this controls any control. The any control block gives you this guy here, where I can set any control, one that we have not yet determined, but that we can feed into this as an input, and we can change its Boolean to whatever we want it to be. So, with these tools, can you think your way around this problem? Can you make some code that will create our interlocking buttons without doing a 100 item long if-else statement? I'm going to let you work on your own for a little bit. Patrick and I, we're going to make a weird face that you can pause the video on. I want you to pause the video, and when we come back, we're going to see how we did it. Ready? Go. Welcome back. Did you do it? Did you get it? Did you find it? There's a lot of ways you could have done it. If you failed, it's okay, don't worry. I'll show you some examples. If you did do it, here's some of the ways that you may have done it. I'll show you 3 different ways. First thing that you may have done is use that for loop right here so that when any of our buttons change, for every single button in the array, we're going to do various things. What are we going to do? First thing is we're going to turn the button off. So I'm going to take the set control block. What control am I going to target? For each item in the loop, and so that means for every button in the loop, first thing it's going to do is set its Boolean to false. So that accomplishes the task of turning them all off. And then we need to remember which one was turned on. So let's create a variable, and we'll call this variable the button that was pressed. We did that earlier, right? And the button that was pressed is going to be equal to the control index that we get out of this. But we don't actually care about the index. We care about the control. And the control is in that array. So we'll go to our arrays, and we will get whatever is in the control index. All right? This created a control index of which button was pressed. We will use that control index to look in our array of interlocking buttons, snap that right in there, and that will end up giving us a control. So this variable now represents a control. You can then use this set control option to set the button that was pressed, which was the actual button, not the index of the button, but the button itself, change its Boolean to true. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see that again. All right? Whenever any button is pressed in this bank of arrays, it's going to go through all 100 of them. For every single one of them, first thing it does is turn it off. Then it looks in our array of buttons and then turns that button on. Let's see if it works. Hop into emulation mode. If I turn this one on, it turns on. Turn that one on. Look at that. Interlocking buttons without an infinitely long if-then statement. That works. Let's do it another way. Let's do it another way. OK, that way was nice, but maybe too complicated, you say. That way was too complicated. OK, fine. I hear you. Let's make it a little bit less complicated. I'm going to get rid of this variable thing. And you know what? I'm going to get rid of that. I'm not even going to use the for statement at all. Let's kill all of this. Let's do it another way. First thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off every single control, like we did before. So I'm going to set every single Boolean, whoosh, to false. Awesome. OK. Then I'm going to use my set control block. Which one am I going to set? Well, I'm going to look in my array of controls. I'm going to look in that array of controls, and I'm going to get whichever control came from my control index, like we just did previously. And I'll set its value to true. Even simpler, without doing a loop, right? We're just turning them all off, and then we're looking for the control that happened to be activated based on our control index. And does that work as well? That works as well. Same thing, interlocking buttons. Works for 100, works for 2, works for 3, works for 1,000,000. 3 lines of code. Ah, not so bad, right? Let's do it another way. Let's get rid of this. Let's break this apart. Kill that, keep the control index around. Let's see what else we need. Now, this next way might be what could be considered the most efficient way to do it from a coding perspective. It might seem more complicated, but it probably performs the fewest number of computational actions to get there. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I mean, this isn't really about making interlocking buttons anymore. This is more about showing you the tools you have at your disposal to think through more problems in the future. Anyways, in this one, we're going to use our for loops. For index ranging from 1 to 10 and incrementing by 1. What does that mean? So it means that we're going to do whatever is in the event handler of this loop once, and then we'll go back and we'll do a second pass of the loop and execute the exact same code, and then a third time, and we'll keep on doing those passes until 10 passes of the loop have occurred, and then we stop. Now, doing the same thing 10 times in a row would sound pretty silly, but our code won't be doing the exact same thing 10 times because there will be some variables in there. Now, so for us, we're not going to do this from 1 to 10. We're going to do this from 1 to 100. But wait, what if we don't have exactly 100 buttons? What if we change that? I actually want to know exactly how many buttons are in this bank. So let's use the length of array block. The length of array block is however long the array is. An array is as long as it is based on how many items are in it. So right now, it's 100. All right, now what's this loop going to do? We're going to set the control. We will grab our getInArray block, but rather than use the control index, we'll use the loop index. So if we're doing the first pass of our loop, it looks at button number 1. If it's on the second pass of the loop, it looks at button 2, etc. So let's make sure it's looking at our array of interlocking buttons. And then we'll change its Boolean, but not to just straight true or false. We'll change it based on whether or not the loop index that we're currently on is equal to the control index of the button that was pressed. So if we're on the first pass of our loop, but the button that was actually pressed is button 6, those numbers don't match. So button 1 is turned off because this is false. Then it moves on to the second pass and turns button 2 true or false, etc. When we're on the 6th pass of our loop, those two numbers match. So this is true, so button 6 is turned on. And then it keeps on going through the rest of the loop's range. So it only does one action per item, which is why it's probably the cleanest way from a coding perspective to do this. Let's double check that it works. And yep, once again, we have the same end result of our glorious interlocking buttons. Okay, so whichever way you want to do it, which if you followed me on any of those or not, what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to take this block controller, I'm going to name it interlocking buttons, and I'm going to add that to my user components. Add that right down here. We'll call this interlocking buttons. Now, forever and ever, you've got a user component that you can grab immediately, always use, that has any number of interlocking buttons that you want. You can then go in and edit the function as much as you want to customize it to do a thing based on what you want those interlocking functions to do. But you don't need to worry about writing that script ever again for the history of your life. Congratulations, that's our gift to you. Now, if that felt a little bit advanced to you, then you've made it. You've got through this part of the course, and there's elements of the block controlling world that touch on scripting that can make your brain feel like spaghetti. And I get that. I really do get that. If you found that that was something that you said, oh, I could go a little bit deeper on that, well, I recommend you take a look at Jeff's course about the Lua scripting side of things, where we go dive more into that kind of mentality of self-referencing code that can be really, really tight and scalable in amazing ways. Jeff, do you want to talk about that?
All right, we're so glad you came to the intermediate version of the class. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the advanced version of the class, where we're gonna do all of this, but with more magic, more awesome, more Lua. It's gonna be great. See you soon.
Perfect, yes. For the rest of you, thank you so much for getting through this. We're proud of you, you did it. However, there is still more of the course ahead of you. So you then want to sign up for one of the live sections with the instructor, which will take you through the last sections of this UCI. Honestly, don't worry, it's not more complicated than that scalable interlocking buttons things. We're just going to tie everything up by getting some real feedback from our lighting controller, and we're going to add some press and hold buttons for the camera. But we do that with a live instructor because we want you at this point to be able to talk back with us and have a conversation. If you've been following along and you have questions, then you're dying to ask them. So do that with the instructor in the live course. So sign up for one today. All right. Thank you very much. Patrick, get him out of here.
I'm sorry about the singing. I'm sorry about the Darth Vader reference. I'm sorry that Nate doesn't know what goes on sandwiches. And I hope you don't think less of me for anything that I said over the course of this course.
Well, that ship has sailed. All right. Thank you very much. Take care.